Hello and welcome back to Game Brigade. My name is Brian. If you're new here, thank you for joining me. Today, we are going to be diving into Grimcoven, the newest game from Awakens Realms. If you're new here to the channel, we will do these deep dives on these crowdfunding campaigns and give you my opinion based on some of the key mechanics that I've played so that you can make the best decision if this game is for you. If that sounds interesting, let's go. Okay, so we are going to be diving into Grimcoven. We have played some games. I've watched some playthroughs to get how other people have experienced this game, and I think I've got a fairly decent idea of some of the key mechanics, and I want to kind of share them with you guys. That way you guys can really make the decision if this game fits for you in your collection. So what is Grimcoven? Well, this is a kind of a dark Victorian era style boss battling game that is scenario based, which means there's no progression as of what we know of right now. So that means you're going to be doing a scenario based one-shot missions where you're going to read basically a prologue, you're going to have a boss that you're going to be fighting, and then you are going to be on a different type of scenario map. So think of games like Cthulhu Death May Die or Massive Darkness 2 in terms of those scenario one-shots. So in this game, though, you are a hunter playing as one of these different types of hunters whose goal it is to vanquish the enemy boss. Now, there is kind of a cool like wanted poster for all the bosses, and you are going to draw one of these cards, which will kind of set up the boss you're going to fight, as well as the scenario you're going to be playing against. This is also a dice allocation game, which is going to be one of the key mechanics that you're going to be playing. What do I mean by that? Well, depending on the equipment that you've selected, every character will have a different starting deck of equipment for items, for weapons, as well as gear. And they're going to have slots for you to place your dice for different types of activation abilities. And those also will determine what starting dice you're going to select. For my character, I played as Duality, who seemed kind of like a melee swords master who was a lot of flourishing, a lot of repertoire, whatever they're called, ripostes. And my dice I picked were blues and blacks. So I will then roll those dice, and you'll assign those dice to different types of abilities. On the board, you are going to see different types of enemies that you're going to face, as well as elites, regular minions. There could be NPCs eventually that you can run into, as well as the boss who starts spawned on the map for the scenarios we've played, and will roam around eventually trying to defeat you. So that's the rough overview of what this game is. But I'm going to dive into some of the specific mechanics, though, so you can understand if this game works for you. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is the character progression as well as the leveling up system. So as I mentioned, there is a dice mechanic in this game. So you are going to roll your dice. From those dice, you're going to be able to choose different types of actions. Now, there are basic actions that include move, sprint, tactic, and cleanse. Let's go over what those mean. Move obviously means you move up to your move value. The move value will be in the bottom right location of your player board. Right now it is 2, so I could move my character 2 spaces if I took that action by placing a die in that spot. You'll notice that sprint has a different type of icon. That means I have to have a dice with a matching face to place it there. To sprint, that is my move +1 for a sprint. It is also the only way for you to traverse through the portals, and all the portals are considered adjacent. The tactic is in a way for you to get rerolls. When you take the tactic action, you'll take one of these tokens and you'll store it in your tactic slot. You're only allowed to store one tactic in your tactic slot, but there are upgrades that you can eventually get that allow you to store more tactics if you want to have more abilities for rerolls in the game. The next ability is cleanse. You would have to roll one of these stars to be able to cleanse, and this is a way for you to remove harmful status effects like burn or weak, hunger, things like that. And then we have assist. Assist is an interesting gameplay mechanic. I could place a dice in there, and my ally can take that action for whatever dice face that I place in that location. So for example, if I needed a sprint and I don't have the ability, my ally could place a dice in assist, allowing me to take their assist dice and eventually place it in sprint so that I could sprint on that turn, giving me almost an extra half action for that turn, which is kind of cool. Okay, but with that, there are also your core abilities from the deck. You have your item abilities for your swords and your armor. So from there, you have let's see here. So each player gets 3 different types of starting equipment that they're going to choose from. And these starting equipments, as I mentioned, will have a notice at the top telling you what type of dice that you're going to be getting by selecting this item. So you're going to select your 2 dice. I picked these 2 last time, and then these ones are out of the game. But you're also going to have the ability to have your deck, your evolution deck, if you may. And the evolution deck allows players to, as they grow in level, by gaining corruption, by either adding more cards to their tableau of available actions, or by adding additional dice to their available action pool. So how does that work? So here at the very top of the player board is what they call the corruption mat. You can actually see the last game I played, my corruption got to 17, which is pretty freaking corrupt, and we'll talk about how that affects you as well. During the corruption phase, there are several unlocks. You can see them here at level 2, level 4, I believe level 6. And every time you meet one of those by adding corruption to your player board, lament effectively, by adding these lament cubes to your player board, you have the option of drawing the top 2 cards of your evolution deck, choosing one of them to become part of your tableau, or by discarding both of them to the bottom of the deck and then choosing a dice of whatever color you want and adding it to your available dice selection. Of course, by adding dice to your available pool, it's giving you more actions to take on your turn, because you'll roll all your dice and you'll assign your dice to different types of abilities and actions. So that's great, but then obviously you're foregoing the ability to get those additional actions as well. Now, as you get up here in the corruption level, once you've reached level 10, your character will actually flip to its corrupted duality side, and then I will have an enhanced ability, so my passive ability gets stronger. I also gain more health, and my miniature will be replaced by the corrupted variant of it as well. Now, that all sounds fine and dandy, but there is a segment of the turn order track when players start their turn order where you will be drawing a corruption card to read based on the level. So here I'm at 17. They get pretty nasty at 17. So for example, when I drew this one, it says I move 3 spaces towards the closest ally, which would be right here. We're just going to be on him. And then I'm going to deal 2 damage to each ally in range 0 to 1. And if I dealt any damage, I will heal 1. And if there are no allies in range 0 to 1, I will gain a hunger instead. And then this card gets discarded. So you can see that as my character becomes more powerful, we are being corrupted by the lament that is emanating through the battlefield that we're on. And eventually I cannot see friend from foe, and eventually I'm dealing damage to our friends. And as you grow in lament and you get to 20, you will actually take one of the secret cards, and it'll tell you what will happen when you've reached that max level. Also, once you've reached 10, the upgrades drastically slow down. They're no longer every 2 upgrades. They move to, I think, every 3. So they're a little harder to get upgraded, but it is a way that you're going to gain power. Now, we're going to talk more about this system when we get closer to the final thoughts, as well as how the boss battling works. But a lot of the people that I've seen talk about this game, when I've seen people discussing in the comment sections and online, people think this game is very difficult, or they're seeing it as hard for people to play. And I think my comment to that would be that this game is a very much an escalation type game. It's all about starting very weak and almost too weak at times, but you're escalating and generating these corruption tokens to the point where you are going to be able to wipe the board relatively easily. And we'll talk about that some more. In terms of the actual gameplay mechanics, though, of the dice rolling and the leveling up system, I find it to be very, very easy to understand. Things are fairly basically point and click in terms of, yep, that makes sense. I put a dice in a thing and I do the action. There are a few actions within some of the upgrade cards that have poor wording or just don't make sense in terms of the English language of what I would expect this card to do. But those should be cleared up. This is a prototype, so those things are still kind of being worked on through the translation process. But for the most part, I was very, very satisfied with the way the things worked and how quickly the turn structure went regarding the actual player turns. Effectively, a player turn is you roll your dice, you take 2 actions, I do my 2 things, my ally takes their 2 actions, I take 2 more actions, they finish up, and then I finish up with my actions. Boom, we're done. Then we move on to the next segment, which is the opponents or the enemy boss. So let's now transition to the boss, because it's the next major mechanic of this game. This is a boss battle, so we want to make sure we're understanding how this game works for that aspect. So the boss mechanic is pretty straightforward, and what I want to point off first is they have these standees right now that say step 1 event. I'm not sure how these will be into production, but at first I thought these were kind of gaudy and kind of huge and a little weird, but it actually became pretty nice because it tells you what to do first for each segment as you move through. So let's follow the chain and kind of do it. So the first thing we want to do is check the event. That's step 1. If we have a current event, it'll trigger and do any of the abilities. But we don't currently have right now since we're at the start of the game, so we'll move on to step 2, which is regarding the minions. The minions are these small little enemies on the board, and they will activate and do their thing. And the way the game works is there are 2 sections for the enemy AI. It'll basically say, if this works, do the first applicable thing. If that's not able to be then complete, then do the second one. So for example, the minion here says charge. If there's a hunter in range 0 to 3, you'll move 3 spaces and attack that hunter in range 0 with 2 of these black dice. So for example, we would move 1, 2, 3 right up here, and then they would roll the dice. And then the way that combat works is these dice face, there are 2 dice face right now, you'll reference the board and do whatever the dice say to do. So here we would deal 1 burn, and the claw would deal 1 straight true damage. So that's basically how those work. So these minions will do their thing and go through that. Now there are potentially some other things that occur, especially with this boss. There are banners that can affect the way these minions work. So for example, this is move all minions 2 spaces, gives minions basically additional movement abilities, so they move a little faster. But we're going to, that's scenario based, that's not necessarily gameplay. I'm just saying that there are different types of mechanics based on the boss that can influence the game. So the next thing we do is step 3, which is referring to the elite. Sometimes you might have an elite minion on the board who's stronger than the regular minions, who's also going to be doing a somewhat similar of an activation. That will be referenced on the large kind of oversized playing card here, and you will do the same thing, follow its activation rules, and go from there. After that, you will then do the boss deck. Now, the boss allows you to see basically what's happening this turn and what to expect next turn. The way this game is won is that you are trying to defeat all of the boss's cards that are representing different types of body parts on this boss. You'll notice that these cards all have a health total as well as a lament reward for defeating it. Now, the thing that I believe from reading the rule book is if you deal damage, let's say we dealt 9 damage to this boss, and he then activates, this card will lose all of those damage tokens, as from what I'm aware, and they go into the discard, and these effectively don't count as damage. Now, I wish that was a little bit more clear in the rule book, but I believe that means you have to effectively deal all of the killing blow damage in one go, and that's how we played it. So whenever we were going to try to attempt to defeat a boss part, we would try to make sure that we could actually do all the damage this turn, the both of us, so that we could not have any lost damage. So effectively, you are trying to defeat the boss. So the first thing we look at when we look at the boss activation card is you look at the top and it says move all minions by 2 spaces. We'll do that first, so these guys would move. Everything is going to move and be on top of us. And then it says focused. Focus basically means that this character is focused. He is in line and ready to deal the max amount of damage. The way you can unfocus a boss is by dealing damage to him equal to the amount of players that are in the current scenario. So right now we're doing an example of, say, a 2-player game. So if we dealt 2 damage to this boss, this focus would not be triggering on this card. After that, you will then continue along. So first we do the focus. So this would say teleport the boss to a space with the minion closest to the hunter. So he's going to jump all the way over here, which stinks. And then he's going to reveal a random banner, which was that card that I showed you that was giving additional benefits to the game. And then he would move 2 spaces. He doesn't really need to do that because he's on us. Attack a hunter in range 0 to 1 with 3 dice. So same thing, you roll the dice and you do the effects that are listed. That is the core mechanic of what the boss is going to want to do. After that, we will go to step 5 here, which is listed up here at the top of the boss board. There's a little flow chart that kind of happens. So if we're here at the start of the game, we'll move up here which says new event. We will draw an event, and then starting in step 1 next turn, these events will trigger. So this, for example, says core event overthrow. Each hunter may gain 2 damage to move a space. So when it comes back to step 1, we can take damage if we want to move additionally. That's going to have to be the player's choice if they want to take that kind of damage. This step will then move each time as it goes around, triggering different types of events, spawning additional minions, or triggering these boss stage cards to do additional things throughout the game. So the game kind of has a ramp up period throughout the battle. So that's the core mechanic of the boss. Now let's dive a little bit into my ideas of how these kind of mesh together and how things work, and kind of discuss what I think how this game works or doesn't work in some ways. So let's go back to the corruption mechanic, talking about the leveling up. Every game that I watched or saw people talking about it, it seemed like this game was a very brutal game, almost overly tuned to be difficult. And I would almost agree in a way for that, because the first few turns, as you are trying to get yourself leveled up, are very brutal. Now, the boss doesn't start with weak attacks. The boss deck and what it's doing are all the same. You shuffle it up, you draw 2. So you have no idea what you're going to be facing. And there are several attacks. Like, for example, the first game we played, one of our players took 8 damage from the boss, with 4 of it being actual damage and then 4 of it being burn damage. And you still have that burn token sitting on your player. So if you don't cleanse it, you're going to take additional damage. Having a 12 health character, he was the gunslinger. He was effectively going to be killed within a turn or 2. So there are times where you're like, man, this can be overly tuned. But once we experienced it, we then played another game and we saw, okay, this game is an escalation-based game. It's all about really dancing around the battlefield, utilizing the different types of portal mechanics to get around as you try to pick off minions here and there, picking up some of the lament tokens that are scattered throughout the board, trying to score some of these objective tokens before you even face the boss. Looking at this specific scenario, we have a bridge that the boss is kind of defending on. He's kind of stationed here on the bridge. And at the start of the game, he's going to try to move his way over here. So then at that point, we are all teleporting onto this side to then deal with all the minions over here. And you almost have to do this a few times as he moves back over here like an idiot, trying to catch up to you. Then we then teleport back here as we have to, that's the elite. As we try to, clean up the field and get ourselves up to our corrupted level. That felt a little weird. It didn't feel like other boss battles I've played, and maybe that's fine in some sense because you're trying to get yourself to a level where you can actually do damage. Especially some of these early cards, it's deal a damage, deal 1 damage. And so we're trying to figure out how do I deal 10 damage to this body part, because once the boss activates, this card goes to the discard, this one moves over, and a new card is drawn. And once this deck runs out, you take the discard cards, and you shuffle it up, and you keep going. The only way to defeat the boss is by killing a body part, removing it from the game, and then depleting the actual boss deck until they get to the final card. The final card will say final action. If this card is visible, take all boss attack cards from the discard pile, reshuffle them, and place them here. But of course, this is an idea of if after you've killed them all. If there are no boss attack cards in the discard pile, draw and resolve this card instead. So that's actually how you try to win the game. But, as I said, trying to get to that level takes time. You have to get there. You have to acquire additional dice, and you have to get yourself enough of these upgrade cards so that you can make your combos to get there. The actual mechanic of like the feeling and fun part of this aspect is good. And I liked that the character that I specifically was playing, Duality, I felt like she was really powerful. It almost like my friends was like, that seems almost brokenly good. But it's like, well, you have the ability to build it in a certain way. You have the ability to, kind of choose the upgrade path you're going to want to take based on the cards you're drawn, what works with the dice that I've kind of selected, or do I want to select more dice for more additional actions? For example, in the game, I did eventually have to get a green die because none of the dice that I drew have any way of actually cleansing. And in retrospect, I probably should have grabbed a purple die because they have more cleansing abilities on it. But that's what I had to do. Eventually I had to take a die that I was really only rolling with the hope of getting a cleanse on it. Yeah, so that's eventually what we were doing. But I do like that utilizing your passive abilities down here, utilizing your abilities here. I felt like I was doing a lot of cool stuff once I got to my corrupted level and higher, because you have all those additional abilities and you have all those additional dice to really get there. But getting to that point takes time. It was definitely not the easiest way, especially with the way the game is designed to kind of punish you early. So it was kind of like you're kind of climbing a mountain, and once you reach the pinnacle point, it was almost like a race down. And there was a point where we were at a level where we're close to like 15 or 16 lament, and I felt, well, I don't see how we can lose now. Like, the writing was on the wall. We killed the elite. We've killed all the minions. There's several more turns before minions even spawn. We just have to keep working through the boss parts, and each turn just taking off a body part so that his desperate charge attack, which is the ability that he has once you've defeated a body part, is kind of negligible. So that is the kind of, you have this kind of escalation, and then it kind of falls off pretty quickly, which was kind of a letdown in a way. Now, going to the boss, the thing that I thought was probably the most disappointing, this is a boss battling game at its core. That's what it wants to be. But I will say that the AI deck for the boss, these cards that you're drawing from, they have abilities that they're wanting to do. It felt a little bit dated in terms of what they're doing. A lot of it, instead of making it feel like this character is representing this character, the only thing I felt like he did that was unique to what this character did is it has these banner cards. Otherwise, all I felt like he did was move a few spaces, attacked on target. Moved a few spaces, attacked on target. It didn't give me the sense that this character or this boss was unique in any sense of a manner, or that it was different than any other kind of boss that I played in a game from 10 years ago. So that was a little disappointing, especially when you have this entire AI deck that gives you the sense that it's going to kind of give you a unique battle experience. It just felt like kill all the minions, kill all the things, deal with all the stuff on the board, and then eventually dance around the boss until we can deal damage to him to kill him. So that was a little bit of a letdown in that regard. So looking at the board, I also want to kind of comment on, if you're looking at making a purchase, what do you want to make a decision towards with, like, say, the terrain pieces or some of the miniature pieces, because you're going to have most likely a miniature version or a standee version of the game. I have some of the standees here to kind of show an example. This is a portal. This is the miniature version of the portal, which kind of includes these green acrylic doorways. But the board also has versions, like you can see on the board, that there's a gateway there as well. I will say I enjoyed, for the the most part, the aesthetic that it's providing. It does look good, but I don't necessarily think you have to necessarily buy these terrain boxes. So here's an example, obviously, of the carriage. It looks great in the miniature form, but you can also do just fine with the standee version if that is up your speed. So I wanted to make a talk on that. Like I said, I enjoyed the way these miniatures looked on the field. I think they look great. I enjoy the depth of field that they kind of provide. But if you're kind of looking to save money, I don't necessarily think they add enough there for everyone to make that purchase. The other thing I had some questions on is just some rule book questions. There was some questions regarding line of sight. I feel like every type of game that is trying to do some of these hex-based arena games has a line of sight question that are going to come up. So this game's line of sight was basically center of the tile to center of the tile. If it's unobstructed, you have line of sight. But then we would have instances like, for example, this is a blocked wall, that red indicator, and you put this mini here to also represent that. We had questions of like, well, does this tile see this tile? Because from the center of center, you're hitting through this red line. There was 0 answers into the line of sight question for that. So things like that will need to be cleaned up for this game to truly shine. There should be really 0 kind of questions when it comes to line of sight, or understanding how, because there's a lot of questions, like there's boss mechanic cards that say if it's in line of sight, or the marksman here has range 2 to 4 in line of sight. So those things are going to come up. The other question we had is, this is a bridge, for example. If I have my hunter here and this guy is on the bridge here, does he have line of sight to my hunter? I mean, they can see each other. It's a bridge. Is this aspect out of the game? It wasn't clearly stated in the rules. Who knows? We ruled it as it was out of the game, and that was basically an invisible barrier or wall, and you would have to be over here to have line of sight. So those are things we had some questions on. We also had questions on some of the abilities, how do they interact with each other, some of the verbiage and wording. For example, duality, her ability is to, whenever you play a colored dice, either blue or black, you gain either a white or black wing that you can then discard for different types of abilities on her cards. And since I built my original build to have only blue and black dice, I was getting a ton of wings. And I was like, okay, this seems really busted, because I play a dice to do something. For example, play a dice here, deal a damage. Then I can discard 2 black wings to deal 2 damage instead. So I'll do that, but then I get another black wing right back because I played a black wing. I clarified with the publishers, and they said, yes, that's accurate. But it wasn't very clear in the wording, and I just wanted to make sure, because it seemed like a lot of them were discard 1 white wing. If you do, gain 4 armor. So I was like, I will constantly just do that and then get my white wing back immediately. So for example, this one is place a shield, gain 2 shields, which is this. You may discard a white wing to gain 4 instead. Okay, I'll discard it, and then I get it back. So I constantly felt like that seems really good, especially comparatively to what some of the other characters did with their abilities. I felt like I was doing a lot more. Who knows? I felt like I was also doing a lot more flourishing and it wasn't actually doing anything. So I was like more of like busy work and not doing anything. Who knows with that? So final thoughts. What are my final thoughts so far after this first impressions game? Well, I think that this is an interesting start for what a boss battler one-shot could be. I've made comments when I played Oathsworn that I wanted a one-shot boss battler because boss battlers are one of my favorite types of board game mechanic. I love the idea of dueling a boss and trying to defeat it and working around its mechanisms to try to figure out whatever that puzzle may be with your limited abilities. I love that idea. I also love the modularity that Grimcoven is providing here. You have different types of these map environments which change up what are going to be happening on the map. You have this entire evolution deck, so you're going to have different types of upgrade paths based on what you're drawing at any given moment. I like that there's a lot more variability for the replay aspect of this game here. I question how much depth there is in terms of the deck, and I would like to see some more improvement of the AI system. I think that's totally possible. And I also think that this game could be hard for a majority of gamers based on how hard some of these enemies can hit you, and then how quickly you can just die. The gameplay seems roughly about 2 hours, almost maybe 3 hours at times, which is also running a little long for a lot of different types of gamers. Not to say that I didn't have a good time playing this game. I had a good time. I just wonder if it's going to be for everyone, and I want to make sure people are aware of what they're going into when they're backing Grimcoven. I think it's going to be a really cool boss battle with an incredible theme, and actually, reading through the hunt book, it has kind of like an underlying story happening behind the scenes, which is cool. So I'm curious how they're going, maybe they intertwine some of these bosses into each other, how they might give you more of a history of what's happening in this location. I think there's a lot of stuff here. I just hope that there are some things cleaned up to make it a little bit more playable. Some of the things I also would have loved to have seen are even more upgrade cards, of course, giving more options for us to have branching paths of different types of builds. I think that would be super cool. The dice basically are representing different types of things. Like you have magic, you have combat, you have shields, and I believe agility is kind of where I was going with the green. I'm not sure what the actual wording is on it. But I would love to be like, well, maybe I want to play duality and do like a magic offensive build. But when you go through her deck, there's not too many instances of magic requirements the dice face for it. So I would love to see maybe the ability to have more branching paths available for certain characters. In fact, for what we played, which was the gunslinger and duality, the purple dice didn't really come into effect, but we also only have 3 characters. We didn't play the Technomancer, which I think the Technomancer actually looks really cool because she takes advantage of these special yellow dice. But there could be also obviously more characters. There could be some mages that are going to specifically be rolling a lot of these purple dice. But I would like to see just more available customization options so we can, have more of the replayability aspects in this game. So that's going to be my quick first impressions review. Hopefully you guys found this helpful at all. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think of this game. I would really like to get your guys' thoughts going forward. Let me know in the comment section down below. I hope to do a deeper dive into the campaign once it's live on GameFound. So be looking forward to that video once it goes live. And again, my name is Brian. If you're new here, please consider subscribing and hit the thumbs up. I will talk to you very soon.